economist, said the same thing, that states have to spend money and while companies have to raise wages, and then you don't have recessions and depressions and the wars that come with depressions.
Right.
And so absolutely right. And many people are saying that that's the solution now. I mean, Bernie Sanders in the United States, that was basically a Fordist and a Keynesian solution. He's saying we need to raise wages and social spending and tax the wealthy in order to have redistribution.
Right.
And that, would definitely resolve a part of this crisis. Absolutely. But the thing is that, the capitalists around the world, the elites around the world, the oligarchs, the sheikhs in the Middle East, the thing is that they're not doing this, or if I can use the term, the transnational capitalist class is not intentionally wanting to see this crisis. What happens is that the individual global corporation has only one objective, and it's to maximize profit.
Right.
Okay? We'll put Ford aside, the individual Ford aside for the moment. And so they just go about the world trying to maximize profit. They don't want a crisis. They don't want an overaccumulation crisis, but that's the nature of capitalism. In order to break that tendency towards this crisis, you need states to intervene and to regulate capital, and you need mass social movements and trade union movements to pressure corporations for this downward redistribution of wealth. But what happened is when capital went global, the individual nation state really doesn't have that power anymore to force corporations. This restructuring, and trade unions and social movements can pressure their national governments, but you really need transnational pressure. You need really a transnational progressive Keynesian Fordist state to pressure global capital. You need a whole new global political system that can pressure the transnational capitalist class and bring that type of change about. We're not at that point, we are not there right now. Mass social movements and so forth still take place at the nation state. That's something we can come back to later in the interview. But first, let me go back to the link between crisis and militarization.
Okay.
And so we can trace out when the crisis really hit in 2008, the financial collapse. But before then, you already saw signs of it in the late 20th century, the turn of the century. You had the Asian financial collapse of 1997, 1998. Then you had the dot-com bust and the global recession of 2000, 2001. That was already showing you that we have global overaccumulation. Then came 2008 and this total financial collapse. So over the last 20 years, or let's take it back to the mid-1990s to late 1990s, the transnational capitalist class, with the backing of states, which we can call neoliberal states, states with the transnational capitalist class are at this point controlling, turned to several mechanisms to keep profit-making going worldwide in the face of crisis. Okay, your listeners will be familiar with these mechanisms. One is that the corporations, with the help of their governments, raiding and sacking public budgets, imposing austerity, giving bailouts to the corporations, corporate subsidies, increasing government debt, issuing bonds, which we spoke about, treasury bonds, which we spoke about. All of that helped offset the crisis momentarily and kept corporations able to continue to invest. A second one is there's been this unbelievable expansion of credit to consumers, especially in the United States, but also worldwide. And the consumers aren't making enough income to pay it back. But as long as I can still use a credit card to purchase, the day of reckoning and the new collapse, economic collapse, is pushed back. And so right now, and I do have this statistic in front of me, U.S. households owed in 2016 $13 trillion in student loans, credit card debt, auto loans, and mortgages. $13 trillion. And it's clear that they can't pay it back. U.S. workers and working class families are already working more now than they ever have worked before. And
say that again, Professor. Say that again. Did you just give that figure again, please? You're saying about the
U.S. households held in 2016 $13 trillion in student loans, in credit card debt, in auto loans, in mortgages. That's more than the whole GNP for an entire year of the United States.
God Almighty.
So the thing is, families, they used to, before the mortgage crisis, they would refinance their homes in order to continue consuming, and now they lose their homes to that. We know all of that. Now it's credit card debt, it's the student loan debt. So the mechanism of expanding credit to consumers to keep the economy going and avoid that overaccumulation, that can't go on forever. That's going to crash at some point. So the third mechanism that the transnational capitalist class and governments have been pursuing, and this, again, your listeners are probably so familiar with, you see it all the time, is unbelievable financial speculation. I and others have called the global economy a global casino. Now, speculation means you're dealing with fictitious capital. Fictitious capital means you're not dealing with houses and boats and food and clothing and shoes, and everything that physically is produced in the world and people need. You're just dealing with finance moving around computer screens around the world. That's
credit default swaps. Credit default swaps is an example.
Credit default swaps. Right, credit default swaps, especially derivatives. The general term is derivatives. All of those things. All of the currency speculation. So in traditionally economists say it's okay to have fictitious capital a little higher than the real economy, but when that gap grows and grows and grows, fictitious capital is so high, the real economy is so low, you have the recipe for a total crisis. So here's data which will shock your listeners. Okay, in 2015, the worldwide production of goods and services, that's called the world gross domestic product, the world product, was $75 trillion. In that same year, currency speculation was $5 trillion in a single day, and, listen carefully, the derivatives market, that includes the credit default swaps and everything under that category, derivatives market was in that year $1.2 quadrillion.
Quadrillion dollars.
It's mind-boggling. $1.2 quadrillion compared to 75 trillion is the real world economy.
So who accumulates all this money in this financial speculation?
Well, especially the global financial firms. So Wall Street is I said that China is actually, for the actual real economy, China is the epicenter of the global economy for the real economy. For the fictitious financial speculation, the epicenter is Wall Street. However, investors from all over the world invest in this through Wall Street and through global mutual funds firms and so forth. But the point here is that mechanism of taking, again, I have the $1 million, I can't produce any more clothing or food because I can't sell it, no one can buy it, so I financially speculate. So temporarily, I keep the economy going, but that doesn't work either in the long run, as you can see. I mean, that's not possible. So this is the key point. This is what I've been building up to, what I wanted to build up to in the interview. That leads to one more mechanism to, in the face of overaccumulation, to keep the global economy going, keep profit-making going, keeping accumulation going, and that's what I call militarized accumulation. You need to make wars and conflicts and ever more military spending and ever more destruction because that keeps accumulation going when there's no other way of doing it. So if you look at the war on drugs, in quotes, not really a war on drugs, war on terrorism, the war on immigrants, the construction of border walls, the creation of new immigrant detention centers, the ever-growing prison industrial complex, the installation of these mass surveillance systems, the increasing hiring of private security guards and whole mercenary armies, all of these become major sources of profit-making that allows accumulation to take place through militarization. So listen, this data shocks, and so I want your listeners to hear it. If we take this mechanism because militarized accumulation explains a lot of what's going on in the Middle East, even Syria and Iraq, at the structural level, right, at the deeper level, behind those headlines, behind the immediate geopolitical explanation. So the U.S. military spending, it unbelievably jumped since 9/11. It jumped. The Pentagon budget increased 91% in real terms between 1998 and 2011. And worldwide, total military outlays grew by 50% from 2006 to 2015, from $1.4 trillion to $2.3 trillion. So what this is telling us is that worldwide accumulation, that is profit-making in global corporate activity, is shifting towards militarization all over the world and conflict. So that's why I was saying that Raytheon's stock value increased $1 billion overnight when those Tomahawk missiles were fired at Syria. So that's what we're seeing. What
I was going to say to you is that, me as an activist, as a street corner activist since the invasion of Iraq, what really really boggles your mind, and how many of our fellow Americans don't even realize it. I mean, the whole game plan, you attack, you invade, you bomb the hell out of a country, you destroy the infrastructure, and then you give contracts out with our tax money to private corporations to rebuild the country, right? That's the scam.
You just hit the nail on the head. You hit the nail on the head. So what I'm saying is that dynamic, which you just identified, is becoming a more general and built-in feature of the global economy and global society. We're living in a global war economy. That's what's happening. But not just that. You said that perfectly well. But look at building a Mexico border wall. Some 400 and some odd firms, military companies, and construction companies and engineering companies from all over the world, not just the U.S., put in bids to build that wall. Okay, so what happens, your listeners, I'm sure are familiar with, and your listeners as well, the Corrections Corporation of America. They're the biggest company that runs private immigrant detention centers and also private prisons. When Trump won the election overnight, their stock soared 40%.
Yes. That's right.
And so this is what I'm referring to as militarized accumulation. So it's pushing the global economy and especially Washington, along with the geopolitical considerations, it's pushing global capitalism headquartered in Washington towards endless and escalating military conflicts. So,
Professor, let me just, right before we get on to Trump, let's just try to preface this by saying that the roots of all this didn't begin in the late 20th century. During the Vietnam, I don't like to use the word war because it was a civil war, it wasn't all Vietnam. But anyway, during the Vietnam thing, whatever you want to call it, every time a helicopter, Bell helicopter they built, a Huey, every time a Huey got shot down, that was $1 million that the U.S. had to spend with Bell helicopter to buy another helicopter. So $1 million every time a Huey got shot down.
Yeah, I mean, one, you're absolutely right, and secondly, you can take it back even more than then. The war profiteers from every single war there's been. Going back decades and decades, if not centuries. You're absolutely right about that. So what I'm suggesting is that continues. But during the Vietnam War, you could have eliminated, theoretically, you could have eliminated that happening. You could have ended that war of aggression, and you would still have a functioning world economy and a functioning U.S. economy through the production of Detroit autos and so forth and so on. But what I'm saying now, the phenomenon that you're absolutely right, goes back before globalization, is now really front and center of the global capitalist system. And so that's what I'm getting at. This militarized accumulation now becomes generalized. The global economy becomes a global war economy. And of course, this pushes us to a much more dangerous situation than the 1960s or 1970s in Vietnam. With the escalation of nuclear weapons and with a new generation of warfare and so forth.
Okay, let's talk about the rise of fascism, because you cover that a lot in a lot of your writing. Here's something that you said during an interview that I have here. You said the crucial point is that fascism, whether in its 20th or emerging 21st century variant, is a response to deep structural crises of capitalism, such as that of the 1930s and the one that began with the financial meltdown in 2008. The rise of fascism in Europe and elsewhere in the 30s was a response to the crisis of that decade. Today, the emergence of a new neo-fascist movement is a response to the crisis of global capitalism. Can you expound upon that rise of neo-fascism in the United States?
Absolutely, in the United States, but we're seeing it elsewhere in the world too. We're seeing it.
Yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry. In Europe too, there's a lot of it. Yeah, go ahead.
And then we go on, and in Turkey and Philippines and in Israel. But let's focus on the United States, which is really the key thing here. Well, the difference between why would fascism emerge in the United States? On the one hand, because fascism in the 1930s was a fusion of national capitalist groups with a repressive and reactionary political force in the state. And so we're seeing that's, by the way, I'm not saying that we currently live in a neo-fascist system in the United States. What I'm saying is we're seeing the rise of neo-fascist movements, and neo-fascist movements have a toehold in the U.S. state in the form of sectors of the Trump regime. Okay. But this tendency has been going on now for 10, 15 years or so, this push towards a neo-fascism.